Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the hidden structural forces that literally drive the success or the failure of our systems. We're going to unpack this by looking at a really fascinating two-part column series by Dr. Nimrod Israeli. Now, we'll touch briefly on the first piece, the trajectory of growth, but we are going to lean heavily into the second column, focusing on the hidden mechanism behind how prosperity is actually structured. Because you've got to wonder, right? Why does some groups succeed, while others, with the exact same resources and talent, completely stall out?
Well, there's this fantastic quote from Dr. Israeli. What repeats across systems reveals what lies beneath them. Just think about that for a second. It is not just a coincidence that an ancient Roman farming estate and a modern Silicon Valley tech startup can suffer from the exact same growing pains. When we see identical patterns of growth and stagnation happening across centuries and across completely different industries, we're not just looking at flukes. We're looking at a huge, irresistible mystery. There are invisible structural patterns controlling our organizations from the inside out.
So this brings us to a really counterintuitive question. Why is it that adding more effort, more money, and more knowledge to a system eventually causes it to stagnate? To really grasp this, look at the historical anomaly of the early agricultural settlements in the land of Israel, the Moshavot and later the kibbutz. These farmers were highly educated. They had massive external financial backing, the absolute latest modern agricultural knowledge, and great infrastructure. With all that support, you'd naturally expect absolutely explosive, unstoppable success, right? But inexplicably, pumping all of this intense effort, money, and skill into their daily activity led to severely constrained outcomes. The system became incredibly active, for sure, but not more effective. The harder they worked, the more they stalled. Why? Okay, let's dive into this and unpack this structural mystery layer by layer. We're going to cover the illusion of effort, the trajectory of growth, the hidden mechanism, the coordination limit, and finally, transformation or decline. Part 1, the illusion of effort, breaking the misconception of inputs and outputs. To get to the bottom of this mystery, we've got to completely shatter the misconception of inputs and outputs. We have to ditch the comforting idea that just throwing resources at a project guarantees it'll thrive. Dr. Israeli points out a brilliant analogy here. Observing a clock doesn't mean you can build one. I can look at a 747 airplane flying overhead, but you definitely do not want me trying to build the engine. Observing successful outcomes is totally different from understanding the internal mechanisms that actually make them work. Without understanding the gears of the clock or the aerodynamics of the plane, you can't build one, fix one, or improve one. The same applies to human prosperity. If we only look at the end results, like wealth or company size, we're just relying on luck and imitation. We need to understand the gears. Moving on to part 2, the trajectory of growth, the visible pattern across history. Before we pop the hood to see those gears, let's briefly establish the visible symptoms of this whole phenomenon from the first column in the series. Let's zoom out. Human societies historically reorganized their structures to handle increased activity and scale. Look at the trajectory. We started as small bands, where everyone did a little bit of everything and coordination was super direct. As groups grew into tribes, direct coordination wasn't enough, so leadership emerged. When tribes expanded into villages, activities became so varied that roles had to specialize. And finally, in cities, we see massive, complex interdependence. Every single time human activity expanded, the old way of organizing completely broke down, forcing a structural evolution.
But hey, let's zoom back in, because this trajectory isn't just ancient history, it repeats today all around us. When an agricultural value chain expands, it connects way more actors across logistics, cultivation, and markets. When a business grows or a functional team scales up, the exact same thing happens. The sheer volume of activity inevitably forces the structure to change. But what exactly is happening inside that structure as it expands?
All right, part 3, the hidden mechanism, the universal law of increasing complexity. Now we're jumping straight into the core of the second column, the mechanism. And honestly, this is where things get incredibly fascinating. I'm so eager to reveal exactly how and why this structural evolution happens from the inside out, because it totally rewires how we view management. Let's walk through these cascading structural effects. Step 1, growth increases activity. Listen, when you add even one new person to a team, you don't just add one unit of labor. You exponentially increase the number of relationships and communications that have to be maintained. Step 2, this rising complexity demands differentiation. People just can't do everything anymore, so roles separate and specialize. Step 3, differentiation creates interdependence. Because everyone is specialized, no one can finish a whole task entirely on their own anymore. They absolutely must rely on each other. And here is the ultimate irony of all this interdependence. System capability rises, but individual self-sufficiency completely falls. While the whole network gets significantly stronger and way more capable of doing complex stuff, every single specialized part becomes highly vulnerable. Think about an assembly line or a modern tech stack. If one highly specialized part fails or just gets misaligned, that failure propagates through the entire system. The whole operation is bound together in a dense web, relying perfectly on the actions of others. Which brings us to part 4, the coordination limit, reaching the structural ceiling.
So, what happens when this web of interdependence becomes way too dense for your original setup to handle? Well, you hit the structural ceiling. And the crucial point here is this. Failure at this level is a failure of relationships, not components. This is a massive paradigm shift. When your company, your farm, or your team stalls out, it's not because your people are suddenly lazy. It's not because your tools are bad. It's because the structure itself can no longer coordinate the massive web of interactions it generated. You have officially maxed out your coordination limit.
And here's what hitting that structural limit actually feels like on a random Tuesday in the real world. You start seeing diminishing returns on extra effort. People are working twice as hard for half the result. In farming, as Dr. Israeli notes, your agricultural yields might rise thanks to better fertilizer, but the farmer's actual income stagnates because the incredibly complex value chain eats up all the margins. In business, leaders try to fix the chaos by adding more layers of reporting, which, as anyone who has ever sat in a 2-hour status meeting knows, ironically just creates more friction and slows everything down even more. Adding effort to a system that cannot coordinate it just creates pressure. Finally, part 5, transformation or decline, the ultimate structural choice.
So, we're in the final stretch here to discuss the stark reality systems face when their coordination capacity is 100% exhausted. When you hit this wall, you've got to understand the fundamental difference between optimization and transformation. Optimization is just refining parts within your existing structure. Training a person to type faster, or buying a slightly better software tool. Transformation is changing the structure itself. You literally cannot optimize your way out of a structural limit. When a village becomes a city, you don't just build faster dirt roads, you build an entirely new structural grid of highways and subways. Because ultimately, growth produces its own constraints. Trying to continue without transformation becomes mathematically impossible. Why? Because the very structure that once enabled your success, the tight-knit startup culture, the direct reporting lines, the shared responsibilities, that exact structure now acts as your primary constraint. It worked perfectly for level 1, but it is structurally incapable of running level 2.
And that brings us to the formal definition of the core law from the mechanism we've unpacked today, the universal law of increasing complexity. Systems organize increasing complexity until their structure reaches its limit, requiring transformation for continued development. This deep, hidden mechanism perfectly connects our historical timelines of tribes and villages straight to your modern business hurdles. Growth isn't an endless straight line. It's a sequence of building a structure, maxing it out, and then bravely transforming it.
So, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Take a really close look at the systems, the teams, and the organizations you rely on today. When things get tough, are you simply adding more effort, more money, and more reporting into a maxed out system? Or have you realized that it is finally time to transform the structure itself? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep evaluating those structures, and we'll see you next time.